Somewhere on your wrist right now, a small screen is quietly judging you. 8,200 steps. You need 10,000. Almost there, so close, just not quite a real, functioning adult yet, according to a glowing ring. 10,000 steps a day. It sounds like a number a doctor discovered after decades in a lab, something etched into a medical textbook somewhere, backed by clipboards and grant money and people in white coats nodding seriously. It is not. Nobody ever ran the experiment, split people into groups, and proved that 10,000 was the magic finish line for a human body. Today, I am going to show you the actual place that number came from, and it is not a hospital. It is a 1965 Japanese marketing meeting. I will show you what decades of real research since then actually found the honest number to be, why the speed you walk at barely matters, and roughly how many steps the average person already takes without a single app cheering for them. Quick thing first, because I have to. Everything I am about to say is general information plus my own opinion, not medical advice. I am a cartoon man with a round head and, technically, no legs. My personal daily step count is 0, every single day, forever. If a real doctor gave you a specific step target for a real condition, listen to them, not to me. And no, I am not about to tell you walking is bad or pointless. That is a very different, much dumber video, and also I would get so many angry comments. Walk, it is great. Let us just go fix the number stapled to it. Okay, let's go. So where does 10,000 actually come from? Rewind to 1965, 1 year after Tokyo hosted the 1964 Olympics. The whole country had just watched its athletes sprint and vault across brand new television sets, and suddenly regular people felt a little guilty about how little they, personally, moved. A company called JAMA Clock and Instrument saw the opening and rushed out a brand new pocket pedometer. A doctor and researcher named Yoshiro Hatano had estimated that the average Japanese adult only walked somewhere between 3,500 and 5,000 steps a day, and figured pushing that number up would help burn a few more calories and fight rising obesity. Reasonable, sensible, very 1960s public health thinking. Yamasa needed a name for the gadget, something catchy enough to sell off a shelf next to every other clock and timer they made. So they took a round, ambitious, easy-to-remember target and built the whole product around it. They called it the Manpo-kei. Manpo-kei. It translates, more or less, to the 10,000 steps meter. That is it. That is the entire birth certificate of the most repeated health number on the planet. Not a landmark clinical trial, not a panel of cardiologists. A product name, on a gadget, sold in 1965 Japan, riding the high of an Olympics afterglow. Here is the detail that makes this even funnier. Part of the reason the number landed on exactly 10,000 has less to do with biology and a little more to do with handwriting. In Japanese, the character for 10,000, man, looks a bit like a stick figure mid-stride, almost like a tiny person walking or running. A catchy name, a lucky-looking symbol, and a round number that sounds impressive stamped on a box. That is genuinely most of the origin story. Dr. Hatano's estimate was a reasonable starting point for its era, and he was not wrong to want people moving more. Nobody is dunking on 1960s public health here. But nobody, then or for years afterward, ran the actual experiment. Nobody split a few thousand people into groups, had some walk 10,000 steps a day and others walk 6,000, and tracked which group actually lived longer or stayed healthier. The number was never tested against anything. It was just catchy enough to survive. And once Manpo-kei pedometers sold well across Japan, the number quietly hitched a ride onto every fitness tracker, every step-counting app, every gym poster that came after it. All over the world, decades later, still coasting on the reputation of a 1965 marketing decision that absolutely nobody involved thought anyone would still be following in the 2020s. So fine, it started as marketing, but surely, 60 years later, science eventually caught up and just confirmed the same number by accident, right? Actually, no. Researchers have spent the last several years specifically checking, and the honest number keeps landing lower, sometimes a lot lower. In 2019, a study published in JAMA Internal Medicine followed over 16,000 older women for several years. Women who averaged around 4,400 steps a day had a 41% lower risk of dying during the study than women averaging only about 2,700 steps. The risk kept dropping as steps went up, and then it leveled off, around 7,500 steps a day. Not 10,000, 7,500. That was not a one-off finding either. In 2022, a huge meta-analysis in the Lancet Public Health pooled data from 15 different studies around the world, tracking tens of thousands of people. Adults in the highest step count group had roughly 40 to 53% lower risk of death compared to the lowest group. And for adults over 60 specifically, the benefit curve flattened out around 6,000 to 8,000 steps. A more recent 2025 review pegged the sweet spot around 7,000 steps for the broader adult population, tied to a 47% lower risk of dying early, and called it, quote, a more realistic and achievable target. So the actual science, done properly, decades after the marketing slogan, keeps pointing at a number noticeably smaller than the one glowing on your wrist right now. If a number you have felt quietly guilty about your entire adult life just turned out to be a 60-year-old product name, good, that is basically the entire job of this channel, once a week. Subscribing is free. That guilt was never even backed by a study. Okay, next belief to poke at. The idea that a slow stroll to the fridge does not count the same as a brisk power walk with your arms pumping like you are late for a flight. That same 2019 study on older women actually tested this directly. Researchers measured both how many steps people took and how intensely, how fast, those steps happened. Faster stepping did look slightly better at first glance, right up until researchers adjusted for total steps per day. Once total volume was accounted for, the extra benefit from walking faster mostly disappeared. It was not the pace doing the work, it was the total count. A separate study on the general U.S. adult population, published the following year, found basically the same pattern. Total step count predicted a meaningfully lower mortality risk all on its own. How many of those steps happened per minute, cadence essentially, did not meaningfully add anything extra once the total was already counted. Which means that stroll to the kitchen, the slow lap around the block with your dog, the wandering around the store steps while you decide whether you truly need 7 scented candles, all of it counts. Genuinely, scientifically, all the way. You do not need a heart rate zone. You do not need to power walk like a suspicious airport traveler. You just need to move, at whatever speed your legs feel like moving that day. Last twist, and it is the one that should genuinely relax you. A 2020 study in JAMA tracked steps against mortality risk across U.S. adults and found something almost absurdly encouraging. People averaging under 4,000 steps a day had a noticeably higher death rate than people in the 4,000 to 8,000 range. And going from 4,000 steps up to 8,000 steps specifically was linked to roughly half the mortality risk. Half. Not from chasing some mythical 5-digit number, just from roughly doubling a modest starting point. And here is the part that should take the guilt out of that little watch buzz completely. According to CDC data, the average American walks somewhere around 4,800 steps a day. Not 10,000, not close, well under half of it. Which means most people wincing at that close your rings notification are not actually failing some scientific health standard. They are failing a 60-year-old Japanese product name that was never a standard to begin with. The honest, research-backed target sits somewhere around 7,000 to 8,000 steps for most adults, a touch lower for people over 60, and even a modest bump from wherever you already are buys you a real, measurable chunk of that benefit. You do not need 10,000. You need a bit more than yesterday. So let's put the whole walk back together. 10,000 steps was never a scientific finding. It was a 1965 marketing name for a Japanese pedometer, built around a rough estimate and a kanji character that happens to look like a person mid-stride. Nobody tested it against anything. It just survived, decade after decade, riding on vibes and a catchy round number. Meanwhile, actual research since then keeps landing lower, around 7,500 steps in one major study, 6,000 to 8,000 for older adults in another, roughly 7,000 in the most recent large review. each one tied to real, meaningful drops in mortality risk. And your walking speed barely matters once the total is counted. A slow errand-running afternoon does the same job as a brisk power walk, step for step. Going from 4,000 steps to 8,000 alone was linked to roughly half the risk, and the average American is already sitting around 4,800, not zero. No smash, no guilt trip. If you want one of these every week, an old belief, quietly taken apart with actual sources, subscribe. If not, we're still good. You can delete that guilt about missing the ring by a few thousand steps right now, for free. This was wrong all along. Go take a walk, any speed.